Something is buried beneath the Nullarbor Plain. Not fossils, not geological formations, not the remnants of ordinary deep time. What survey teams, cave divers, and independent researchers have found in the caverns and passages beneath one of the flattest, most featureless stretches of land on Earth defies every comfortable explanation. These are not myths. These are documented discoveries, restricted access sites, and anomalies that have never been officially addressed. 11 locations, 11 structures, and not a single satisfying answer from the people whose job it is to provide one. If you are new here, subscribe now. New documentaries every week, and this channel does not shy away from what the textbooks leave out. The Nullarbor Plain stretches across southern Australia for roughly 270,000 square kilometres. The name comes from the Latin nullus arbor, meaning no tree, and from the surface, the place earns that description completely. Flat, pale, and featureless. A limestone plateau baked by sun and scoured by wind, where the horizon looks identical in every direction and a driver can travel 6 hours across it without a single landmark changing. Most people treat the Nullarbor as nothing, a crossing, a gap between places, but beneath the surface, the story is entirely different. The Nullarbor sits above one of the most extensive cave and passage networks on Earth. Hundreds of sinkholes, thousands of kilometers of unmapped underground space, freshwater aquifers sealed from the surface for tens of thousands of years, fossil records reaching back tens of millions, and in multiple confirmed locations, formations, and structures that geologists and archaeologists have struggled for decades to explain using the frameworks they are allowed to use. What follows are 11 of those locations. Number 1. Koonalda Cave. Koonalda Cave sits at the western edge of the Nullarbor, roughly 100 kilometers north of the Great Australian Bight. From the surface, the entrance looks like a sinkhole, a collapsed limestone shaft with a rope descent required to reach the floor. What came back from those first descents forced a reconsideration of when structured human activity in Australia actually began. 75 meters below ground, in a chamber that receives no natural light whatsoever, there are thousands of finger engravings pressed into soft limestone walls and ceilings. Lines, spirals, grids, curves that repeat, with a consistency going well beyond random mark making. The patterns cover surfaces throughout the chamber in configurations requiring planning, coordination, and repeated visits over extended time. Radiocarbon dating placed these markings at a minimum of 20,000 years old, with some analyses pushing toward 22,000. The people who made them descended 75 meters in complete darkness, carrying fire, and created geometric patterns on walls that no one on the surface would ever see. The mainstream interpretation calls this ritual behavior tied to Aboriginal spiritual practice. That explanation may be partially correct, but the precision of certain grid formations, the consistent spacing of repeated motifs, and the sheer sustained scale of the operation has led independent researchers to suggest Koonalda may represent activity from a period and a culture older than any tradition currently identified. The Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies has classified the site as outstanding universal value. Public access has been closed since the 1970s. The stated reason is conservation of fragile engravings. That is true, but it also means independent analysis of the full chamber has not been possible for 50 years. Number 2. The Nullarbor Karst Labyrinth. The Nullarbor is the largest exposed limestone karst landmass on Earth. The rock beneath the surface is riddled with passages, shafts, chambers, and connections, forming over an estimated 30 to 45 million years. Surveys have identified over 150 named cave entrances accessible from the surface. Geologists estimate this represents a small fraction of what actually exists below. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted across 2 decades indicated void spaces, extending beyond what surface topography predicted. The connectivity between known cave systems remains poorly understood. Cave divers, penetrating the linked submerged passages, have found interconnections far more extensive than mapping suggested. Abracuri Cave, Bubby Cave, and the Cocklebiddy system appear to be nodes in something much larger and mostly unmapped. What makes this worth pausing on is not the scale. Large cave networks exist across the world, What researchers have noted in multiple surveys is the degree of geometric regularity in certain passage cross-sections deeper in the Nullarbor network. Natural caves form in response to water movement, pressure, and the fracture patterns of rock. They produce generally irregular profiles that change over short distances. But in multiple locations within the deeper passages, documented sections maintain near-consistent oval or rectangular profiles over distances difficult to attribute to natural erosion alone. The limestone here is ancient. The water that carved these passages largely stopped flowing millions of years ago. And yet what lies below looks less like what groundwater makes and more like what something else was deliberately making space for. Number 3. Cocklebiddy Cave and what lies beyond. In 1983, a French cave diving team completed what was then the world's longest underwater cave dive, penetrating 6.5 kilometers into the flooded passages of Cocklebiddy Cave on the eastern Nullarbor. They turned back not because the passage ended, but because their air supply was exhausted. The cave continued beyond them. Several subsequent expeditions have attempted to push further into the system. All have confirmed the passage continues. Sonar and acoustic equipment deployed at depth return signals, consistent with large open chambers beyond the current mapped boundary. What those chambers contain is unknown. The geometry of the explored section is itself notable. The main passage at Cocklebiddy maintains a remarkably consistent cross-section over extended distances, widening into gallery-like spaces at regular intervals before narrowing again. Divers across multiple expeditions have described moving through something that feels deliberately proportioned. That is a subjective impression, and cave diving produces psychological stress that can shape perception. But multiple independent teams using different equipment in different years made similar observations without prior coordination. The 1983 team published full survey notes. Those notes reference a section named the Cathedral, a chamber roughly 25 meters high and 40 meters wide, with a near flat ceiling and near vertical walls meeting at clean angles. Natural chambers form this way on occasion. The combination of the flat ceiling, the vertical walls, the consistent proportions, and the location 6 kilometers into a flooded passage beneath a desert is a combination that has been noted and not answered. Number 4. Bubby Cave. Shorelines below ground. Bubby Cave is one of the largest known underwater caves in the southern hemisphere. It sits on the Nullarbor approximately 40 kilometers from the coast, accessible through a surface sinkhole that drops into a large freshwater lake. The lake surface sits roughly 8 meters below the surrounding plain. The cave continues downward beneath the water, with passages explored to depths beyond 40 meters and extending several hundred meters horizontally from the entrance. What makes Bubby significant beyond its scale is what the walls and floors of its upper chambers hold. At and near the waterline, researchers have identified ancient shoreline features, mineral deposits, and sediment bands corresponding to periods when the water table sat at significantly different levels. Some of these features indicate the cave was dry, or partially dry during periods when regional conditions differed considerably from today. During at least one of those dry periods, something moved through the upper chambers. The evidence is documented. Sediment disturbances in locations inconsistent with animal movement, organic material in positions suggesting deliberate placement, and, in one section of the upper cave, a series of shallow depressions in the floor arranged in a pattern matching no natural erosion or collapse mechanism researchers have proposed. Access to Bubby requires a diving license and government permit. The site has not been systematically excavated. The sediment disturbances have been catalogued in formal records. They have not been explained. Number 5. Malang Cave, the Dressed Stone. Malang Cave in the western Nullarbor holds the record as Australia's longest mapped cave system at approximately 6.3 kilometres of surveyed passage. That figure represents only what has been physically measured by people on ropes and with instruments. The actual extent of the system is larger. The cave contains distinct sections including dry upper passages, a transition zone, and a lower flooded portion connecting to the regional aquifer. Systematic exploration began in the 1960s and continued into the 1970s. Among the things the early survey teams documented and could not account for was the presence of what appeared to be worked stone in 2 locations within the dry upper passages. not flaked or chipped stone of the kind associated with tool manufacture. Smooth-faced, angular sections of limestone broken or cut along planes inconsistent with natural spalling or collapse. The pieces were catalogued, photographed, and submitted to the Western Australian Museum. The formal response was that the formations resulted from unusual stress fracturing in the rock. That explanation satisfies some geologists and not others. Stress fracturing in limestone typically produces irregular, curved faces. The pieces noted at Malang had flat surfaces intersecting at angles that original survey notes described as resembling dressed stone. The deliberate surface facing associated with quarried building material. Those photographs exist. The catalogue entries exist. The question of what made those cuts has not been revisited with modern analysis. Number 6. Abracuri Cave, the hall that should not be here. Abracuri Cave lies roughly 80 kilometres west of the South Australian border on the Nullarbor. It is one of the few Nullarbor caves accessible to non-specialist visitors under permit, and is managed by the South Australian Government. The main chamber at Abracuri is extraordinary. It runs approximately 96 metres in length, 30 metres in width, and 28 metres in height. The ceiling is remarkably flat across most of its span. The walls drop at near vertical angles from that ceiling to the cave floor, giving the chamber a box-like geometry that is highly atypical for a natural dissolution feature. Natural caves form where water exploits weaknesses in rock. They follow fractures, dissolve along grain boundaries, and produce rounded, irregular profiles. A chamber with the dimensional regularity of Abracuri requires an unusual alignment of geological factors rarely seen in combination. The limestone here is uniform in composition and shows no obvious structural characteristics that would have guided dissolution into this specific geometry. Researchers have examined the chamber thoroughly. The current technical explanation points to horizontal bedding planes controlling ceiling height and a consistent fracture pattern governing the walls. That explanation exists in published literature. What the literature does not address is the cumulative improbability of all these factors coinciding to produce something that looks, in its proportions and regularity, far more like a constructed hall than a dissolved one. Number 7. The Nullarbor Aquifer Anomaly. Beneath the Nullarbor Plain lies one of Australia's most significant freshwater reserves. The aquifer system extends across hundreds of thousands of square kilometres and holds water isolated from surface input for tens of thousands of years. Researchers who have sampled this water have noted its unusual purity. Old groundwater in contact with limestone for extended periods acquires a strong mineral signature. The Nullarbor aquifer water is comparatively clean, suggesting either recharge pathways that have not been identified or a degree of isolation from surrounding rock that is not fully understood. Beyond water quality, the pressure regime within the system draws attention. Artesian conditions exist in sections of the aquifer, meaning water rises above its stored level under its own pressure when a borehole is opened. The pressure gradients mapped across the system vary in ways attributed to differences in aquifer thickness and recharge history. In the central Nullarbor, a zone of anomalously high pressure exists that has not been fully accounted for. Some researchers attribute it to a deep confined section sealed by an impermeable layer. Others have noted that this pressure anomaly is centered on the part of the Nullarbor where cave passages display the highest degree of geometric regularity in their cross-sections. That correspondence has appeared in informal research literature. It has not been the subject of funded investigation. The two observations sit in separate databases, and no researcher with institutional backing has chosen to examine them together. Number 8. Murrawijinie Cave and the resonance. Murrawijinie Cave near the eastern edge of the Nullarbor in South Australia is one of the few systems on the plain with documented ancient animal remains. Megafauna bones, including material from diprotodons and giant wombats, have been recovered from the lower sections. These animals died out approximately 40,000 to 46,000 years ago. Their presence establishes that Murrawijinie was open to the surface and accessible during a period well before the mainstream account places extensive human activity in this part of the continent. The cave also has acoustic properties that have drawn independent attention. Certain chambers within Murrawijinie produce strong resonance at identifiable frequencies. Sound introduced at one end of the system is carried and amplified in ways that researchers studying cave acoustics describe as atypical for a space of this configuration. This has been informally measured across multiple visits. The frequencies involved fall within a range also documented at ancient sites in France, Mexico, Malta, and Turkey, locations where researchers have proposed deliberate acoustic design by their builders or occupants. The question that surfaces in discussions of Murrawijinie is whether the chambers producing this resonance were shaped to do so. The megafauna bones place large animals in this system 40,000 or more years ago. The acoustic properties of its chambers are not typical for a natural cave of this size. A cave proven open to large fauna in deep prehistory, with unusual measurable resonance, is a combination that deserves more sustained attention than it has received. Number 9. The Eucla Underground and the Missing Files. The town of Eucla sits near the Western Australian and South Australian border, perched above the cliffs of the Great Australian Bight. Its most photographed feature is the ruined old telegraph station, half swallowed by drifting sand, one of the most iconic ghost structures in outback Australia. What lies beneath Eucla is almost entirely undiscussed. The limestone beneath the town site and surrounding plain contains cave chambers that were partially explored in the early 20th century during works associated with the original overland telegraph line. Workers at the time reported chambers of significant size. Survey notes from that period reference one underground space, large enough to contain a building. Those early exploration records were absorbed into Postmaster General Department files. They have not been publicly accessed in decades. More recently, ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted as part of coastal erosion monitoring along the Bight Cliffs, returned signals consistent with subsurface voids beneath the Eucla Plain. The geometry of some of those voids drew comment from a researcher who published briefly in a geological newsletter before the work was discontinued. His interpretation was that one void sequence showed corner angles and consistent linear dimensions inconsistent with natural dissolution. The monitoring program was designed for coastal management, not underground investigation. It found something anyway. The data sits in a government archive. The finding has not been followed up. Number 10. The infrasound events of the central Nullarbor. There is a category of report about the Nullarbor that does not appear in peer-reviewed journals, but has been documented consistently for decades by people who live and travel across the plain, beginning at least in the 1960s and recorded in logbooks of the Indian Pacific Railway and in traveller accounts from the air highway. There are repeated references to a booming sound with no apparent surface origin. The description is consistent across unconnected sources spanning decades. A deep, single impact, felt as much as heard, with no echo and no subsequent vibration. It occurs at irregular intervals, sometimes absent for months, sometimes reported several times within a season. It has been attributed to gas release from underground chambers, to atmospheric pressure events, to distant sonic booms, and to minor seismic activity. None of these explanations has been confirmed by instrumentation placed in the region during an actual event. In 2004, an independent research group spent 6 weeks on the central Nullarbor with seismic monitoring equipment. They recorded the sound twice. On both occasions, the seismic instruments showed no surface or subsurface seismic origin. The signal appeared to originate from a fixed point approximately 15 kilometers north of the air highway, in a section of the plain where satellite imagery shows a cluster of sinkholes in a non-random spatial arrangement. The group published their findings informally. The coordinates of the apparent source are in that report. No funded scientific expedition has since visited the site. Number 11. The Murrawijinie radar anomaly. In 2009, a geological survey team working in the Murrawijinie region of Western Australia used ground-penetrating radar during a routine mineral prospecting exercise. The survey was looking for subsurface features indicating economically useful deposits. In one section of the survey area, the radar returned a sequence of anomalies at depths between 8 and 12 meters that the survey geologist flagged as non-geological in appearance. The anomalies formed a pattern covering approximately 400 meters by 200 meters. The individual elements showed consistent spacing, consistent depth, and consistent orientation relative to each other. The survey geologist submitted the data with a formal note recommending independent investigation of the anomaly. The company classified the data as confidential under Western Australian mineral exploration licensing provisions and redirected the team. The geologist later spoke to an independent researcher about the findings. He described the pattern as resembling a grid, with elements at regular intervals corresponding to no known geological feature in the region. Individual anomalies were estimated at between 2 and 5 meters across, with a density contrast relative to surrounding limestone inconsistent with natural variation. No excavation has been conducted at the site. The survey data remains confidential. The geologist has not been publicly identified. The researcher who recorded his account published approximate coordinates. Those coordinates sit on a section of the Nullarbor Plain that no expedition has yet visited, with the intention of confirming or disproving what the radar found. 11 locations across 270,000 square kilometers of limestone plain, a cave with 20,000-year-old geometry, sealed from independent analysis for 50 years. Passage cross-sections that natural groundwater does not produce, a chamber proportioned like a constructed hall, angular stone faces, in a record cave system that no modern instrument has re-examined, a pressure anomaly in a sealed aquifer centered directly below the most geometrically regular passages on the plain, acoustic properties in a cave proven open to fauna 40,000 years ago, telegraph-era records of underground chambers that have not been re-explored in over a century, radar signals pointing to void sequences with corner angles filed in a government coastal archive, an infrasound source traced to a fixed underground point that no funded team has since visited, a confidential radar grid sitting in a corporate filing system. Not one of these individually forces an extraordinary conclusion. Taken together, they describe a landscape that has not been honestly and completely examined. Almost none of the Nullarbor has been excavated below 15 meters. The cave systems beneath it cover less total mapped length than the road network of a mid-sized city. The surface of this place looks like nothing. That may be exactly the point.